G'day, guys. This clip is taken from a 2 hour long interview with Sam from the Worldwide Warhammer podcast, where we talk all things WTC and Team Australia. If you'd like to see the full interview, check out the links in the description below. And with that being said, let's get into it.
Look for the Blood God. Oh, very good. So we head into, obviously, we talked now about a bit more of the WTC. So I guess heading into day one, so this is, I guess, round one of round two. So you would have played Malta and, sorry, apologies. Actually, day one would have been the end of the War Masters, and you have one round, which would have been Malta, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So how are the vibes heading in? So were people pretty angsty, or are they very chilled? Like, what was the vibes like heading in?
It was really, really chill. We'd had a lot of fun already as a team in the lead up to that point. We had one thing. So every year, Team Australia does something silly during the pairings process, and the idea here is that it's to try to build rapport and set a tone for the match. And this year, what we did is we basically, as the first pairings cards went up, the entire team was like, ooh. And then when it was flipped, we would go, ah. And then we'd do a little golf clap. And we did that every single time something was put up. And it's the whole team doing it. It was absolutely hilarious, to the point where like the other team started getting in on it as well. So you've got like every other table, you can see all the different pairings tables around. Like you can see USA versus whoever over there, and you can see Spain versus whoever over there. And then whichever table the Australians were at was loud, and we were all like, whoa, and then all laughing, and that really set the tone for each match. That we're here to have fun, and we're here to not take it too seriously enough that we're paying respect to the event itself, paying respect to our opponents and to our nation, and making sure that we are representing competitive 40k at its finest, but also making sure that we're having a laugh before the first dice is even rolled. We're having a laugh. And because we started that from day one, when we went into that game into Malta, there was undoubtedly some nerves, because it was people's first games into the the WTC opportunity. But I think by and large everyone was very relaxed, both us and our opponents. And we had an absolutely fantastic round into Malta in that first day.
Yeah, because obviously for them, it was their first time. So they sort of had a UN team last year where a couple of their key members played for the WTC, but this was the first time as a country as a whole they played as the WTC. So everything went well. There was nothing to talk about in regards to that. So
no, there was no hiccups. I mean, and I think that I'm glad we did get them on that first round, because for a lot of our players, it was also their first time. So it wasn't like we were getting paired into some like veteran team, even if it was one of the lower performing veteran teams, but it was of like a veteran team. Could have potentially been an asymmetry between our experience. But because obviously a lot of their players, it was their first year, and most of our players, it was the first year, I think both teams were just excited to get stuck in, and I think that vibe carried throughout the entire round. And there was one point where I looked up and I was just filled with a sense of pride when I could see every one of my players, and they were all laughing with their opponents. Everyone was like laughing and having fun. And I was just like, and then I actually get Ollie comes over and I'm like, what are we doing score-wise? And he's like, yeah, we're crushing them. And I'm like, yep, awesome. That's the two things I wanted to see. One, we're performing well and we're getting the big win. And two, everybody's having fun. That's made me feel so happy. And it was really good to see, like, obviously, there's a ridiculous amount of pressure when you're in the captain's seat to make sure you're selecting the right people, make sure you're inspiring them to do their best, making sure the lists are right, making sure that you've got all the admin covered. So being able to look up and just see, sort of the plan come to fruition, and everybody's having fun and we're doing well, it was really, really like wholesome moment for me.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's always good to hear. And I'm sure something that you're very proud of, like seeing that moment come to fruition. It's always great to see and hear about. So I guess after day one, and I heard obviously, so I talked to Ollie as he came back from WTC. He said they were very good. Like obviously, yes, a Siege 14, but there were some very good players there, and it caught him by surprise in particular. So that 7 Greater Demons list was not a meme by any stretch of the imagination, is what I heard from him, and it was pretty good. I don't know who played against it on Team Australia, but I'm sure it was.
I think Matt Marisoli played against the Demons list.
Yeah, so there you go. So But anyway, so heading into day 2, so obviously you're playing against Team Norway and then Team Italy. Was there anything that you came across that during the day that you want to recount about?
Not particularly. So we played into Team Norway, and I'd been speaking with the Norway captain in the previous round because obviously he played against Jeremy in the singles. So we were joking about that. We were joking about whether or not me and him were going to pair into each other. Like, we're going to have a captain's off. Like, there was a lot of banter and stuff. So when we got stuck into that round, it was a fantastic sort of energy going into it. I actually got paired personally. I got paired into their guard player, who is somebody that I had played in the War Masters last year when I was a coach. So there was a sense of, at least from my perspective, there was a sense of familiarity there. It almost felt like we were playing with friends.
Nice.
So that was a really positive round. There was one instance that came up in my game that was something that I'd never experienced before, and I'm still sort of analyzing what I would have done in that situation, where we had a really critical ref call, where basically one of the things that the coaches do while the pairings is happening and while the team's getting ready is they set up all the tables, right? And one of the Norway coaches set up their table, and then I got paired into it, and then my opponent's won the role to pick deployment zones. So he picked his deployment zone. I went over and started setting up on mine. And when I started setting up, I could see that there was 2 objective markers that I could hold from behind a wall. So I'm like, yep, cool. I'm going to deploy 1 unit of Terminators here, 1 there. My plan is, he was playing guard, so he's going to shoot me all day. But I'm like, I'm just going to move 2 units of Terminators up and sit on those objectives out of line of sight. And that means I've got a locked-in 10 primary for the entire game, because he's never dislodging those Terminators. So that was my game plan. I've looked at it. I've come up with a plan. He got first turn, so he moves out onto the central objective. I send some jackals out to fight him back, move up onto my objectives. Then he has his turn 2. Then we go into my turn 2. We're like, half an hour into the round at this point, maybe even longer. And I go to score up my things, and he's like, oh, you're only on the 1 objective. And I'm like, no, I'm on both. And turns out that second objective was not supposed to be able to be held from behind the wall. And when their coaches have set up the table, they've set up the table wrong, and they've set the objective up so that the aura spills into the ruin. And I was like, well, like I planned my entire deployment and first turn around the fact that I would be able to hold that. I understand that I'm not supposed to, and we check the map pack, and that's correct. We're not supposed to, but I'm like, what do we do here?
Much has happened.
That's a really hairy one. Like, what's the solution? Because if the solution is just move the objective marker to where it's supposed to be, well, then I've been severely disadvantaged because I've planned around the table as it was, as I arrived at it. So that's a disadvantage for me. But if you say, oh, no, it's okay, Dean can hold it from behind the wall, well, then my opponent will be upset because he's like, but I picked this table with the idea that he wouldn't be able to hold that. And he's planned his turn around me not being able to hold that because the objective that was set up in his deployment zone, you couldn't hold. So it was a really tricky situation. So we call the ref over, and we're like, neither of us have a good solution to this. Like, what do we do? And the ref basically just said, get every one of your coaches here, clear the table of models, clear the table of terrain, set it up properly, and start again. Wow. So we literally had to start the entire game again, which is something that's like, I've never seen that happen at a tournament. I think it is the right call because neither of us were happy about it. I wasn't happy about it because I'd had some really good card draws. He wasn't happy about it because he'd had some really good dice rolls. So it was like we both sort of felt like we were losing out there, but it was the best way to reset the game and play it fairly.
Of course.
So that was a bit of an upset. Everybody was a little bit upset by that, but it was not really anyone in particular's fault. And I think the resolution at the end was fair. So that was into Norway. And then as for the next round, so this is round 3, second game of day 2, we were into Italy.
Yep.
And a few people had told me, had approached me before the round and said that the Italy team were exhibiting some unsportsmanlike behavior, right? Let's put it that way. And they just gave us basically a warning. They're like, look out for this guy, he does this. Look out for that guy, he does that. And I was like, okay, cool. Here's the WTC angst that we were expecting, right? So far, we'd played Norway, and it was absolutely fine. We'd played Malta, it was absolutely fine. I was like, well, here comes the angst, right? It's inevitable at some point. However, I think because when we got paired into him, we did the whole, had a laugh with him, we had a lot of fun in that pairings process. I think that just diffused any angst that they had, and we got them in a really, really good mood, and we were all in a really good mood. And as a result, we had exactly zero problems with any of their players. Everything was really chill and really good. So I think that also just goes to the testament of the philosophy that Australia wielded this year was about making sure that our first priority is making sure that everybody is having a fun time. And then our second priority is going to be about, making sure we get those results. And that really insulated us from any potential angst that we could have experienced if we had have gone into it, being angsty ourselves, because we'd been warned that they're going to be angsty. And then you almost get that contentious moment happens before the round even starts. Whereas we had the inverse. We had a real fun moment before the round starts.
Sorry, I should have had myself unmuted, right? That's professionals. Professionals happens to the best of us. So yeah, that's a really great approach to it. Obviously, I know we were talking before the call about like when you start things off, I guess contentious, like it's so much easier to be escalated. Whereas if you start things off nice and neutral and friendly, you start off like and give people their best chance to be the best selves. So kudos to you and the team for doing much, and obviously taking into consideration like, hey, just be on your best behavior, or just take this consideration, but give everyone their best time of day and chance to show their best sports and stuff like that. So amazing, really, really cool. But obviously into Italy, look, obviously they're a C2 team, and they've performed historically relatively well. You guys just got scraped a narrow win. Was it quite hairy for you in round 3? Like were there times like, oh crap, we're going to go down here or draw here?
No, I think for most of it, we were looking at like a relatively small win the whole time. I think there were a few people that scored slightly lower than predicted and a few that scored slightly higher. There was a couple of, I think that one of our players went down pretty hard, but that happened early and we had that information early, which is always good, right? Like if you're going to lose hard, make sure you lose hard fast. There's nothing worse than thinking that you're going to win the whole way up until the last, 20 minutes of the round and then losing hard, because at that point we can't do anything about it, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Whereas one of our players went down relatively early in the round, which then Ollie was able to take that feedback and he was able to go to certain players and be like, okay, cool, I know you're predicted to get a 12, but if you can take some risky moves here and like maybe spend a CP to redraw a tactical card if you get a bad one. Normally you'd be like, oh, it's okay, I can afford to have 1 or 2 bad cards. But it's like, no, you need those extra victory points. So spend those CP now, cycle your cards fast, get the points. Or maybe it's like go for a risky 9-inch charge, because if you pull it off, it's going to flip 5 primary and it's going to result in you getting an extra couple of battle points. Those sorts of plays. Knowing that one of our players had gone down, we knew that a couple of us knew we had to do that. And it worked for us, and that was able to bring us back into the fold. So, I think overall we performed relatively close to what we were expecting to, which is all you can ask for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you touched on there about some players being able to like flip matchups or push that score differential a bit higher. So was that something you considered it as part of like your WTC list, or like were there certain players who throughout the whole WTC experience could always push, or was it round dependent?
So we had a loose overall team strategy that was intentionally kept loose so that it could be adaptive and we could modify it. But essentially, we had 4 players on the team that were designed to have lists that have bad matchups and good matchups, but their good matchups are really good, and we would basically wield them as swords to go hunt those good matchups. And then the other 4 players in the team were designed to have lists that they might not have a lot of great matchups, but they don't have any horrible matchups. And those people are just to hold the line and stop the bleeding. And the idea there is if we have 4 people that get like a 9-point loss, but 4 people that get a 15-point win, well, then we win the round. And if we can just consistently do that, that's fine. So we had people where it was like, if you're put into a matchup and you're like, everybody against their team, everyone I'm going to lose to, like my list is bad into everyone. It's like, that's actually not a problem. It sounds like a problem, but it's not, because somebody has to cop those bad matchups. And if you copying that bad matchup facilitates somebody else getting a big win, well, then that's good. And then we weave into that the personalities of the team. There's some people that, when they start to lose, they lose momentum and they lose oomph and they lose even harder. And those people tend to also when they start winning, they gain momentum and they win even harder. And then you've got other people that, regardless of what happens, they keep a relatively stable game plan. And we basically pair those people. So, to give an example, Jeremy Martino, he's one of those stable people. It's like if he's winning, he will continue to win, but he doesn't like go Super Saiyan and turn it into a massive 20-0 win. He just keeps winning.
Sure.
He gets a consistent 12 or 13. And if he's losing, he's probably only going to get an 8 or a 9. It's very hard for him to like get rattled and get a big blowout. Whereas Reese, the other Victorian that we took, he's one of those people where the second he's got on top of you, he just absolutely pushes you into the dirt. So he was one of those people who were like, okay, let's put Reese on a list that has bad matchups. That's fine. But let's get him his greens and he'll put it down as a 12 or a 13. But if he starts getting that 12 or 13, he'll very quickly turn that into a 17 or an 18. So that was sort of part of the team's strategy, was taking people's like personalities and their people's play styles, marrying that up with a list that's going to achieve the team strategy. And I think that's one of the things that we did probably better than anything else this year, was make sure we had the right people on the right lists performing the right role.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I guess just to like sort of rehash the question a bit. So for each round, was that adaptable? So for example, when you used Reese as an example there, were there some rounds where yes, obviously he's got a green favorable matchup, but it's less likely he's able to push. So you would ask, say, Lockie to push maybe a bit harder, or was it a general strategy where all four could generally push? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So it would depend on a few things. One, it would depend on how our matrix looks into theirs, as to who we use in what role, in what capacity. And then it would also, once we've got the pairings numbers in, and everyone's paired and we're off and we have our predicted scores, that's where Ollie would then come into it, and he would have to know, based on the game states, who could push and who wouldn't. And Ollie sort of driv it from that perspective. So, for example, with my list was actually designed to be first put up, because the idea was, if I'm first put up, I'm guaranteed table pick. And there was one specific table layout that my list was designed to be fully optimized on. So the idea was, with the Terminators, they're slow, but on that specific table, I can deploy so close to them and still be out of line of sight that I can actually threaten all of the objectives, even with the slower moving Terminators, right? So that was the game plan for my list, was basically put Dean up, doesn't matter what they throw in, even if it's two reds, like they can pin me with, their Thousand Suns and, whatever else they've got in the lineup that I'm terrified of. It's like, that's okay, because on that specific table, I'll hold them to a lower score. However, there were some rounds where instead of doing that, we'd put somebody else up, because we would realize that I have 3 or 4 people on their lineup that I can get a big win into. So we would sort of switch gears and would use me to bully or attack certain things in their lineup. So it was definitely very adaptable.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, it's good to hear that you just changed from round to round and see how, I guess, the Weaver of Fates goes on, right? So, obviously, after the pod stage, got 3 big wins, or 3 wins. It's
3 wins. Yep.
I assume that was on 3. I assume that was like according to expectations, like just get those 3 wins out of the way, and then now you prepare for the Swiss star of the tournament. So, I guess what happened after night 2, essentially, as obviously you got drawn into Spain. So, I assume you prepared for Spain, but then did you do other preps or anything like that?
So what we had done is we'd spent a lot of boot camp developing a methodology for gathering data, right? In previous years, we've basically gone and tried to do our data against every team, or as many as we could. The downside to doing that is that you end up spending a lot of time and effort practicing and preparing, and even just mentally preparing for teams that you're not ever going to verse. So what we did is we refined that process so that we could do it on the fly within half an hour. So as soon as we realized we were paired into Spain, we were like, okay, cool, laptop open, let's read through the Spain's first list and all put our predicted score into it. We had a method where you could question mark it if anybody disagreed. So like if I say, into their Grey Knights, I'm like a 12. If Lockie, our Grey Knight player, thinks that I've misunderstood something about their specific list, and he thinks I'm actually like an 8, and he thinks they have tech to beat me, he would basically just say, chuck a question mark next to that and we'll come back to it. And we basically just went through all of their things, and then we basically went and had a conversation about all of the question marks and basically refined the data that way. And that allowed us to be really, really quick and accurate with our matrix, because you'd basically have everybody thinking about every matchup, but just the matchups that we were going to play. We didn't have people spending time. We didn't analyze USA's lists at all, for example, because we never got paired into them and they weren't in our pod. So we basically didn't even look at we looked at their lists out of morbid curiosity, but
of course,
we didn't put any effort into sort of planning for them. So that night when we realized, okay, cool, we're into Spain, we're going to go home or back to the hotel. There's a little boardroom there that we stole, and we basically got set up in there, and we pulled up the lists and we talked through the mission. One of the other things is that if you're doing the data into teams before you know what round you're paired into them, you're not able to factor in the mission and the deployment. Whereas if you know, okay, we've got Spain next round, what's the mission next round? Oh, it's a mission with 6 objective markers. Well, you're going to have a wildly different score into that than if you're versing like supply drop, where you start with 5 and the objective markers disappear. That's going to have a very different, the matchups are going to play out very differently there. So we made sure that we had all of the information specific for that round, and then we did that sort of pairings exercise after each round. The ones where it was at the end of the day were better because we could go back to the hotel and we could spend an hour or two, really deep diving them. The ones where it was like, between rounds 4 and 5, where you've just got the lunch break to do the numbers, they were harder. And that's what we had into Poland, unfortunately, is basically the Poland round. We got paired into them, and we had to do their data for their entire lineup in half an hour. Luckily, out of morbid curiosity, a bunch of the teams had already analyzed the Poland lists and already thought about them. So we were sort of, had a bit of a get out of jail free card there, where we were able to be really reactive there. But the idea was that we would basically sit down as a team after we knew who we were paired into and have the conversation then.
Sure. And so I guess my question there is, so obviously you're talking about, I guess, day 4 of the WTC. Like, obviously you would have had a good inkling of when roughly people were placed. Was there not, the willingness or determination for the team to maybe go, okay, when we beat France, or if we beat France or draw France, these are the 3 or 4 teams we could pair into? Like, did you consider that as an option, or did you think the adaptability was, I guess, more important?
We did a little bit, but like the number of teams in attendance made it very difficult to do that, because there was so many teams that, like, for example, after we were on 4 wins, there was so many teams on 4 wins that round. It was like, who are we going to go into? Like, it could be anyone, right? Like,
sure,
So there wasn't a massive amount of value there, and then so we basically just lent on the philosophy that we'd all agreed on at the start, which was that don't fill your mind with unnecessary stuff. Make sure that you're energized and fluid and able to respond rapidly. And there was also lots of instances where you'd look at the pairings and it'd be like one team's got undefeated, but then there might have been something that happened during their round and the results then flip after the fact. So preparing for something before they hit go on the next round is not necessarily useful, because there was plenty of times where you're like, I thought they were undefeated. Oh, wait, there was a problem with a chess clock or something in their round, or something like that. And as a result, that result flips. And then all of a sudden everyone's paired into somebody differently. And if you've just spent the last half hour trying to analyze and figure out who you're going to verse, you didn't take that downtime to go have a drink and grab some food, and then you also have filled your mind with something that's not particularly relevant for the next round. So we kind of just, by and large, we just took our time, relaxed, and made sure we were nimble and fluid and ready to face whatever challenge we got when we got it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And like, talking about filling your mind with stuff, like, I think it's sort of coming around now. It's like, obviously Scotland versus New Zealand, they played in their round, and that New Zealand thought they won the round. And then when they're reviewing scores, they realized, oh crap, there was an issue there with the mission, and it ended up a draw. So in that instance, like, so you could have gone like thinking ahead, I'm playing into this team, and then you spend some time preparing for a round where then it's just useless, right? At the end of the day. So it's an approach to be the very project management style, that agile philosophy, and you go through all the various things, but it's an approach, and it works obviously for a reason. So just to sort of take you back a bit, so playing Team Spain, and we ended in a draw. So was that sort of what you had expected? Because I guess watching the stream from home, there was sort of mixed messaging, because Spain think they were going up, then it was like a draw, then a loss, and it goes back and forth. So what was it from the Team Australia side?
So every round at the event, we had a predicted win based on our numbers. So the pairings team did an absolutely fantastic job. And even into teams where we had an average score of a loss, they were able to secure the favorable matchups for us. So every round we went into it with an expected win. However, there were obviously, as we got into the Swiss part of the event, we're starting to play against some of the top teams. And there were some upsets where people thought they were going to win games, but turns out they were losing games. So throughout the round, we made sure Ollie was updating us on where we were sitting, and there was plenty of times there where Ollie was like, "Man, we're gonna have to pull off some magic to turn this into a win. Like, we're in big trouble here." Luckily, we've got some absolute killers on the team that were able to pull off that magic. The Spain round was quite interesting, and without going into too much, of the detail, but basically they had 4 of their players clock out. And at the WTC, there's a rule where basically if 3 players or more clock out, it's a yellow card, right? So there was one point where, the players had clocked out over and over and over. And then we got to one game, which was Callum's game, where his opponent had clocked out. And basically his opponent was basically fighting to argue that he didn't clock out and that Callum had used some of his time. And Callum's like, yeah, you used some of my time. We had this conversation last term where, you forgot to click the clock onto me. So I did my movement phase on your time. So I then clicked it on, I made sure you used your movement phase on my time. Like that sort of conversation. I wasn't privy to the conversation, but that's the general vibe I got.
Yeah.
And then when he clocked out, he basically the referees all got involved and there was a little bit of a contentious moment there where they were debating, what's going to happen here. And the referees basically ruled it that, the clock is what it is. If at any point you felt that the clock was inaccurate, you should have got a referee at that point and said, I think the clock's inaccurate. Can you help us fix it? The fact that they're waiting until the clock says 0-0 and now you're bringing it up, there's not much a referees can do at that point. So the referees basically ruled it that, no, your clock says 0-0, so you're clocked out. Callum, you can finish your turn and, whatever. And that got us into a draw. Then after that, we walked away with our draw, but we're relatively happy with a draw, right? Like you're playing, you're very deep into the event now. You're playing against another undefeated team, a very experienced and veteran team with some really fantastic players and some really lovely guys as well. Like my game into Spain, I played into their Demons player, and it was one of the most fun games of 40K I've played in a long time. It was absolute sweetheart. Yeah. So there was no harsh feelings or anything like that. The energy was still high. But it got a little contentious right towards the end when the clock started becoming an issue. But we walked away with our draw and we're like, yep, we're happy with that. And then the head referee, Jay, came over to me and took me aside. And he's like, basically explained this rule where if 3 or more players clock out, it's an instant yellow card. And he's like, so basically the Spain is going to receive a yellow card, which is going to be a penalty of 25 points off of their battle points. Mm-hmm. And he basically said, I normally wouldn't do this. However, there's an opportunity here for you to, quote unquote, give them some of your time, even though the round is long finished at this point. He's like, you can give them some of your time and basically just say that only 2 of them clocked out. And as a result, they would avoid the yellow card. So he basically left their fate in my hands on whether or not I wanted them to receive a yellow card. And I had just had an absolutely fantastic game into their Demons player. So I was like, I don't want to hurt this team. So I basically went and grabbed my team, grabbed all the Aussies and said, guys, I just want to hear your opinions. Let's have a vote. What do we want to do here? And it was unanimous that none of our players wanted to card Spain. Even though we did have clock issues in a lot of games, the clock issues, none of our players clocked out. All of our players got to spend their full time. So none of our players felt that they were wronged by the clock. Everybody felt that their games arrived at a close enough to a natural conclusion. So we basically went and told Jay, we don't want to clock. We don't want to card these people. They're lovely guys. They've done nothing wrong here. So we don't want them to receive any penalties. Maybe a warning. Just let them know, make sure that you don't clock out in the next round. So we basically said that. Jay gave me a big hug. He was really appreciative because he didn't want to card them because, being a referee or a TO, having to issue yellow cards is an unpleasant experience. So
absolutely. Yeah.
He basically said, gave me a big hug. And then he's like, oh, you can go let him know if you want. And me being the troll that I am, couldn't resist the opportunity. So I've walked over to him and I was like, oh, Sandre, which is their captain. I was like, come over here. I need to talk to you. And he comes over and I'm just looking down. I'm looking real somber. And I'm like, look, man, like, it's a real unfortunate rule. I don't like that rule, but, I had to speak to the team and like we put it to a vote because I didn't think it was appropriate for me to make this call. So I put it to the vote. And I mean, it was unanimous, man. It was unanimous. We don't want to fuck you. And then I just gave him a big hug and I was like, you're fine, mate. I'm not going to card you. And his face went from like absolute dread to this massive smile. And his whole team was watching this whole exchange and they're all just like, yes. And then they all came around and we had this big group hug and it was a real wholesome moment. It was a real good fun.
Amazing. That's great.
Yeah, so they avoided the card because of that.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good to hear some of the context and history behind, because obviously on stream we saw what was happening, and it's good to understand more of the rule behind it. So obviously that makes it's a big impact having a yellow card, because obviously that flips that draw into a win for you guys, and obviously impacts the round. And obviously it impacts the whole pairings moving forward. And look, obviously in the end, Spain did come second, and they probably couldn't have podium, or it would have been very hard for them to podium with a red yellow card.
If that yellow card had have been applied, they wouldn't have been on the podium. And as far as I'm concerned, like, they did nothing wrong because all of our players were able to get their game done. It would be a different story if one of them had clocked out and then as a result they're rolling their saves on our clock. And as a result, our player didn't get to have their fifth turn because now the round is done. If that was the case, then I'd be like, okay, maybe they do deserve some kind of penalty for that. But because every one of our players got their games done and every one of their players was an absolute sweetheart, I was like, why is there a penalty being even discussed here? Like, there's no issue here. So I think it was a very good job of the referee team to recognize that discretion could apply here and that not every rule needs to be followed to the letter. There is a rule saying that if you have 3 people clock out, that's a yellow card for the team. However, in this instance, that was an inappropriate penalty. And I'm very happy that I was given an opportunity to weigh in on that. And I'm very proud of Spain for what they were able to achieve, because they were on a razor's edge and they were able to rally their squad and pull it together and get on that podium. So that's a fantastic result.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's good to hear, and obviously, a tough call to make. Like I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, but it's good that you went back to your team, reported it, and then made an ultimate decision of obviously respecting the clocks, and what you guys decided as a team was decided as a team. So that's awesome. So obviously from that round, drew into Spain, then you played into Austria. So for the second year in a row, we played into Austria. So the country that they get mistaken for letters all the time. We get interchanged, like doppelgangers, like bad doppelgangers, but doppelgangers nonetheless. So I guess, what do you guys think heading into Austria for round, day 3, round 5, 6, 5, 5, 5? Sorry.
Yeah, this was the round 5. Yeah. Because 6 and 7 was France, Poland. There is one more thing. There is one more thing that I just remembered into that Spain round. However, so after all this has gone down and we've told them we're not going to yellow card you, it's fine. We actually then went and sat down as a team, and a couple of our players remembered that round was secure the banners or raise the banners was the second mission rule, and they had forgot to record their banners. So they realized, hang on, I scored 4 banners in that game, and that would mean that I won my game instead of getting a draw, which would mean Australia actually beat Spain if the scores had been recorded accurately. And I was like, guys, come on. Like, after all of that we just went through, are you seriously asking me now to go over to their captain and let their captain know to hold the celebrations because we actually beat you? And so we had a conversation about it as a team, and we basically said, let's just go talk to them and see what they have to say, right? We're not going to pressure them into trying to change the result. The next round hasn't been paired yet, so we've got time. We basically went and pulled the players aside, and we basically said, do you agree that this person scored these many banners? And they're like, yes, they did. Do you agree that? Yes, they did. So we looked at the score, and we're like, we actually beat you by 1 point, right? So we're like, okay, let's go get a referee and talk to them. And basically, by the time we tracked down the head referee and brought him over, they were minutes away from pairing the next round. And we basically said, here's the situation. And they just said, no, sorry. I understand both captains are in agreement and all the players are in agreement that Australia actually won that round, didn't draw, but it's too late. You've left it way too late. So basically, get over it. It's a draw.
Well, learned. Yeah, I guess
so,
it even happens at the highest level of the game. Like people forget missions.
Yeah, exactly. And as far as I'm concerned, like part of being a competent player, somebody that can play at that, world stage, is just being good at record keeping. Like I was, I'm not going to lie, I was a bit disappointed in my players for having not recorded those scores. Like in your turn, you've moved out onto that objective with your battle line unit. The plan was to raise the banner. Like, why didn't you record it? Like, it's not rocket surgery.
No.
But we all make mistakes. I made plenty of mistakes whilst I was over there. So by no means am I like scolding anybody unfairly here. I'm just basically was raising with them like, here's a lesson that we can learn together is make sure you are recording your scores accurately so that we don't have this situation going into the next round, which was Austria.
Yeah. That makes complete sense because obviously at one point there impacted a draw to a win, and obviously in worst case scenario, it could be a loss into a draw, and it could determine the whole WTC in the end. Like one differential decided multiple rounds, so moving forward. So we were about to talk about Austria. So second year in a row, what was it like heading into this round?
Well, it was good. I mean, it's second year in a row, but like I said at the start, we had almost a completely fresh team this year. So, and I think a lot of their players were fresh as well. So it didn't really feel like a do-over of the previous year or anything like that. So yeah, it was just another round. Some really strong opponents, some really strong lists, but we had a good pairings team that got good results, and then our team were able to, by and large, deliver on the results that we needed, which was fantastic to see. You could definitely notice at this point, though, that the caliber of players was very different than what we'd experienced in the pod. In the pod, the games was felt, by and large, a lot easier, whereas here you could see that there was a lot of nail biters. There was a lot of games that were really coming down to the wire, which was exciting and really fun, but challenging at the same time.
Yeah, as I can imagine. And so, obviously, at the end of the round, you guys got a good win, though, into Austria. So, would have been, 4 wins and a draw then at the end of Austria?
Yeah, which actually meant that we were placed second. We were in second position going into the final day, which is like walking home that night. I was like walking on sunshine. I was like literally, because it was a European summer, but also like I was so proud of what the boys were able to achieve. We were able to play, with our heads held high, very high level of sportsmanship, a lot of fun. And going into the final day in second position was, way higher than I had expected the team to perform at. So yeah, we were all really happy, really high energy that night.
Oh, fantastic. And it's good to hear, obviously, high energy. And obviously prior to the event, not many people speaking us highly, but I'm sure at the end of day 3, they're like, oh shit, Australia's here to play. They've got other players and Liam Hackett and all these people who've been to WTCs in the past. There's some top quality players. And I fair to say they still think that to this day now. So despite what the end results may look like. So end of day 3, obviously we know we're about to play into Team France. And I know prior to WTC, when Solly and Martino were going on to various podcasts, obviously a good mate, Adam Camilleri and Artable Down Under, they said Team France, they got the best team comp of the event. And some people are predicting them to win the event without much spoilers ahead. So I guess, what did you guys try and do heading into preparing for Team France?
So Team France were pretty heavily favored. They actually, and I only just found this out recently, they actually had all of their players were on a specific diet for the event, apparently. Like on a sort of an athletic diet. They were on exercise routine. Like they were in tip-top form, and they were taking this very seriously. They were all still being lovely sportsmanship, but they were taking it seriously. They were here to win. And that night was the night that Jeremy, was weaving our fates and decided that we all needed to eat a liter of Ben and Jerry's each. So that was I have no doubt that Team France was sitting in their hotel analyzing our lists, coming up with pairing strategies, probably even playing a practice game or two. Meanwhile, me and Jeremy are giggling to ourselves as we're walking back from the local shop with just this massive bag with 12 liters of ice cream in it. We're bringing it back, just giggling to ourselves. So, and with the benefit of hindsight, that was probably our downfall. It was probably something we should.
Better Jerry's.
We probably should have taken that a little bit more seriously. Like, we did still, whilst we're sitting there eating our ice cream, we did go through their lists and we did go through pairing strategy and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know about everybody else on the team, but I got bugger all sleep that night because I was full of ice cream. So yeah, but that's how we strategized and prepped for France. We knew that they were going to be one of the strongest teams going in. Our data also wasn't particularly strong into them. They had some really esoteric lists that were, off meta and in interesting ways, and they were going to be difficult for us to verse. So we knew it was going to be a hard round. We probably didn't expect it to be quite as hard as it was, but we weren't fooling ourselves that we were in for the fight of our lives to win that round into France. I think you're on mute. Are you on mute? Yeah.
Of course, I'm a professional. So, apologies. So, in the vlog, when I was watching back, obviously, as they were uploaded live from the Risky Roller lads, so shout out to those boys. I understood that you guys projected, though, for a slight win, despite the tough list. You guys projected for a slight win. Then, sort of what happened, I guess, that unfortunately led to a loss in the end?
We had a few upsets in that round. There was a few people that were predicting wins that got losses. I personally was one of them. They paired me into their guard player. And I had versed guard twice already in the event and won both of those games. One of them I got a 20-0 win. Like, I absolutely crushed their guard player. And then the other one I got, I think, a 13-point win. So I was pretty confident into guard in general. And there was a few other things in their lineup that I was unsure about. So I was like, I might win that or I might lose it, but I'm pretty confident into the guard. So they paired me into the guard, but I wildly underestimated a few things. And that game was on the French War Game stream, my game into their guard. And one of them was just that he had a little bit more infantry than the other guard lists. And it's amazing what the difference one or two extra squads of guardsmen can make to a matchup, because it just meant he was able to move block my Terminators in ways that the previous guard players couldn't. And he also had 18 Bulgrin, which actually stack up pretty well into Terminators in a fight, because they've got -1 damage built in. I have 2 damage weapons. They have 2 damage weapons, but I have a stratagem for -1 damage, but I can only do that at 1 unit at a time. So basically, if we have that big fight in the middle, they actually come out on top. And he can also use orders to give them extra OC to flip objectives. There's lots of stuff he can do with those. And then he also had 2 Rogel Dawn tanks, which is something that none of the other guard players had. So I've gone into it thinking, it's guard. He has no indirect, so he's not going to be able to shoot my Terminators until I present them. And, so I'm going to, I was pretty confident that I was going to win that game. But he was a very, very good player, and he was able to use those infantry squads to screen me and block me in and prevent my Terminators from ever connecting with his Bulgrin. I never touched his tanks at all, which meant that they just got to absolutely blast me off the table. And that was a real big upset. Like, that was me going in as a predicted win, and they sacrificed other people to get me that favorable pairing. And then I came back with 0 points, which was a big upset for the team. But luckily, I wasn't the only one. So if I was the only one that went down hard, I would feel like I cost the round, like I cost the team the round. However, luckily, a few other people also, like, I think it was Jordan had the Thousand Suns into his Space Wolves, and Thousand Suns just rolled really, really hot on a couple of Doom Bolts and some shooting from Magnus and just picked up a ridiculous amount of Thunder Wolves in a single turn, to the point where Jordan was like, I was supposed to win this. I've played Thousand Suns a bunch and win it every time. But if they roll that hot, what can you do? So at a certain point, dice are your enemy. And that happened to Jordan. And he was supposed to get a big win, and he got a big loss as well. So there was a few matches that flipped like that. And as a result, we just didn't get anywhere near what we had predicted. But we sort of knew going into it that we were pretty like optimistic with our numbers. We'd all put in numbers that we were optimistic on, but we knew that this is going to be the hardest round. So a lot of these numbers are probably inaccurate because they will have prepped for this more than we have. So they're going to know when they select, me to verse their guard. Well, they know something that we don't. He's played this matchup. He knows how to use his infantry to screen me. He knows that I don't have a single fly keyword in my army. And he knows that all he needs to do is block me off of those objectives. And it's his game to win, right? So,
yeah. So I guess what do you do in that circumstance there? So obviously, captain, like you put your numbers down, and then unfortunately things gone south. Like obviously, whether to your own fault or the dice betray you, as Jordan happened in the T-Suns. So I guess what do you try and tell yourself and tell the players when something like that happens? Because obviously it's really hard. Like you could have potentially cost around. And I know, like obviously listen to some others where things flipped that way. They took a lot of burden on themselves. So what do you try and tell yourself and the other players when that sort of thing happens?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was quite lucky as a captain that in our first round into Malta, our Josh Brody on our Necrons, he went up and he was supposed to win his match. It was the one green matchup that he had, if I'm remembering correctly. But he lost it and got 0 points, right? And he was the only person on our team to get those 0 points that round. And after the round, I rallied the squad and I basically made sure that I was crystal clear that there's no winning games or losing games as a player. In a team's event, the team wins or the team loses, right? And no individual player is responsible for their results. It's everything that you can contribute to the team. And at some point, what happened to Josh is going to happen to all of us. At some point, you're going to go into a matchup that you think you're going to win, and something's going to happen, whether it be a misplay, whether it be, you get hoodwinked by your opponent being really, really good, or whether it be that the dice just betray you. At some stage throughout this event, it's 7 rounds of some of the highest intensity 40K you've ever played in your life. That's going to happen to every single one of us. So don't beat yourself up when it happens. Just remember, we've got your back. And next round, when it happens to me, I can trust that you guys have got my back, and that's the way that the team functions, right? Unfortunately, in France, that happened to multiple of us at the same time. And that's a problem. That's where the wheels start coming off. But to answer your question about like, how do you rally yourself and how do you, guard yourself against the negative feelings that come from feeling responsible for costing the team around. I think that's a big part of it, is just making sure that everybody's across the board that, no individual wins or loses their game. There's just score, there's just points, and then the team wins or loses the round. That's one important component. And then the other component is that the fact that it wasn't just me on that round, that made me feel good. So when Josh lost his first round, it was okay because the team won. So he didn't feel bad because he didn't cost us the round. We won the round, right? Yeah. And then when I got the big loss into France, I didn't feel that bad because like 2 other people got big losses. So it's like, well, even if like I got 0 points, even if I got 20 points, even if we flipped that matchup 100% and I got a 20-point win, we still would have lost into France. So it's like, I can then sit there and go, well, I contributed to the loss, but the loss itself is not exclusively my fault. And everybody can feel the same way. So that, I think, helps with any guilt that you might have from feeling that you've cost the round. Whereas if I was the only person to lose the game and that resulted in us losing the round, then I might be telling a very different story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully that situation doesn't happen in the future, but maybe it does. And I think it's fair to say that you win as a team, you lose as a team, and you draw as a team. So there's something part of it in the process. I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future about like lessons learned from the WTC. But look, your data was wrong in some areas, and then you got to work it out. Plus, some contingency of Warhammer dice happens. We play a dice game after all, and people make mistakes, even the best of them. So it is what it is. So obviously, after France, unfortunately, loss, we played into Poland, and then unfortunately, again, we lost into them. So I guess what was that round? What felt like afterwards? Like, it's fair to say, pretty heartbroken, I'm sure.
It was, but like at the same time, so after we lost to France, we kind of knew. I feel like we kind of knew in our hearts that the France round wasn't a win, even though the predicted score was a win. We knew that like they're in peak prime form and we're not.
Sure.
And they're going in heavily favored this year. We're not. So we knew it was going to be hard. And so when we did lose, we were like, that's okay, right? And because we were riding such a high from going in placed second at the start of the day, like you can get knocked down a peg, but you're still all the way at the top, right? Like you're still really happy with the results, even with that big crushing loss. So we were still in good spirits. But then when the next round pairings came through and we were paired into freaking Poland, it was like, oh, come on. Like Poland's arguably one of the best teams in the world, and we just lost a round and we drew a round previously. And so normally when you've got a draw and a loss, you're versing somebody else who has a draw and a loss, which is generally one of the weaker teams. But no, exactly. We got Poland. It's like, wow, we just can't catch a break today.
No.
And then when we did the numbers, we had a relatively, I think we had a predicted win into Poland as well, if I'm remembering correctly.
Or like small withdrawal, like one of those.
It was a very, very close round into Poland. But again, we've got, Jeremy and Matt have relationships with a lot of the Polish guys, so there was a lot of camaraderie there. The Polish guys also found the UR pairings process. They found that the funniest. Like there was one of them was absolutely giggling his ass off, and that whole vibe was really high energy into Poland. And we're playing off against them for a podium essentially, right? The winner of this was going to come third. So we were playing hard and we were playing to win. But and I can obviously only speak to my specific game, but it was one of the best games of 40K I've played in a long time. And the level of sportsmanship that my opponent, Duda from Poland, exhibited was absolutely mind-blowing. Like, we had a chess clock malfunction where when we're setting up, before the game started, when we're setting up, chess clock wouldn't work. So we basically got one of the refs gave us one of their clocks and was like, just use this. But it was one of those ones that has like almost like a calculator style screen. And you have to be on eye level with it to be able to read the numbers. If it's on the table and you're looking down at it, you actually can't read the numbers. So at the start of the round, I'm just like, this chess clock is rubbish. Like, I get it, it works, it's fine, but I'm constantly having to go over there and squat to make sure that it's ticking down on me when it's on me and on him when it's on him, because you can't see it. And it didn't have a paddle on the top. It had buttons.
It's the touch,
so you couldn't even see, as long as the paddle on this side is up, I know it's on me. Like, you just couldn't tell. So I was like, this clock is rubbish. And my opponent was just like, don't worry, dude, I promise you, I have zero intent on clocking you out. I will not clock you out. You have my word. And having that attitude when you're playing off for a podium position at the World Team Championships is phenomenal. I've played local RTTs where my opponent is angsty over the clock, whereas this was like playing off for one of the most prestigious, events you'll ever attend in your life. And my guy was chill as. And there was tons of opportunities where, like, as we're moving things, it was very, very clear. There was lots of opportunities where it could have, either one of us could have pulled gotchas on each other, but we didn't. I wanted him about blood surge moves with my berserkers. He was very forthcoming with his information. He was playing Admech, who I'd never versed before. So I was like, I actually don't know what any of your crap does. So I was just like, if I charged that with Terminators, like, how many am I going to kill? He's like, you'll probably kill this many. We talked through the maths. We worked it all out together. He made sure to let me know, I have a stratagem that I could use for a 5-up feel no pain. So during my turn, when I'm planning out what I want to do, he was communicating that sort of stuff. So there was no surprises there. So it was an absolutely amazing round. And by all reports, all the other players had a similar situation. So even though we are playing off into the hardest team, like historically the number one seeded team, the number one ranked team, and we're playing off for a potential podium position. So you'd think that those two things would combine to make for some really intense and, challenging 40K. It almost felt like you were just playing a casual game with your mates. It was very, very chill, very relaxed, very fun.
That's fantastic. That's what you want to hear at the top tables at the end of the day, right? Is have a nice, calm atmosphere and give each other the best chance to perform. So that's awesome to hear. And I've talked to Duda in the past, and he's always come across as amazing. So it's good to see that came across on the table as well. So, and hopefully, I'm sure more people get to experience that in the future. So, but unfortunately, at the end of the Polish round, I guess very similar to the French round, I think some things went opposite to what we predicted, and we unfortunately had a decent side, a loss. So it was like whatever 100 to what it was. So I guess
Look for the blood god.